Hey everyone, in this video we are going to have a look at Stephen Spender's poem Moving Through the Silent Crowd. I'm going to try and keep it short, and I can't possibly cover everything in this poem, but we're going to give it our best shot. Now, before we hop into the poem itself, I should note that Stephen Spender is well known for being a poet who was, quite concerned with social justice and the plight that human beings very often found themselves. This particular poem, Moving Through the Silent Crowd, is located in the context of the Great Depression and is all about the plight of those without work and, as a result, those who are poverty-stricken. One of the things that he does to great effect in this poem is capture what it is that these people are going through by placing his speaker in the midst of a faceless crowd of people. And by referring to by placing the speaker of the poem in a silent crowd, a faceless crowd, if you will, it emphasizes the scale of the problem and tries to confront the reader with the magnitude of the problem. With that said, let us have a look at the poem itself. Moving through the silent crowd who stand behind dull cigarettes, these men who idle in the road, I have the sense of falling light. They lounge at corners of the street and greet friends with a shrug of shoulder and turn their empty pockets out. The cynical gestures of the poor. Now they've no work, like better men who sit at desks and take much pay. They sleep long nights and rise at 10 to watch the hours that drain away. I'm jealous of the weeping hours they stare through with such hungry eyes. I'm haunted by these images. I'm haunted by their emptiness. I think that one of the ways we can approach the poem is to look at how we can divide it up. And I think one of the ways we can divide it up is to group the stanzas, or the quatrains rather, into three groups. I think we could put the first group together, or the first two together into a group, have the third quatrain by itself, and the fourth quatrain by itself. The first two quatrains kind of provide the context for the poem. It starts with the speaker being located within the silent crowd. I think we want to pick up on the description of the crowd. They are a silent crowd for a reason. We'll get to there in a moment. So the speaker is placed within the silent crowd to provide us with context. And then what really happens is, in stanza 1 and stanza 2, Stephen Spender describes what an outsider sees observing these people. So he places his speaker within the silent crowd in stanza 1, and the speaker is moving through the silent crowd. If you want to pick up on small little pieces, I think he chooses the present participle here because we normally associate the present participle, I say normally, we do associate the present participle with continuous tenses. And so there's the suggestion that the speaker is moving through an endless, silent crowd. And that's quite an eerie image. If you can imagine it, the image that we have here is of an almost faceless mass of people. And we have our speaker, who is not a part of this crowd, moving through them. And what's particularly disconcerting about this is that they are silent. There's no chatter that you might expect from a crowd. I mean, think about it. If you go to a shopping center, or if you go to a concert, or any place where you have a gathering of people, the default is to have a hubbub of noise. People try and avoid crowds because they don't like their senses being assaulted. Here we have a totally silent crowd. And that's not normal. People are social creatures. Human beings like to make noise. We connect. We talk with the people around us. We laugh. We maybe don't cry in public, but we laugh, we talk, we joke, we make comments. We don't stand around silently. In fact, you have to force people to be silent when they are together. And so it's quite disconcerting to have a totally silent crowd. And then this image is enhanced by the idea that the silent crowd is made up of men who stand behind dull cigarettes. Now, dull cigarettes here is a transferred epithet. If you don't know what a transferred epithet is, it's when the adjective, in this case the word dull, is connected with one thing, cigarettes here, but actually refers to something else. So the word dull here, although it's used to describe cigarettes, is actually being used to describe the men. The men are dull. Their lives are dull. It's not the cigarettes that are dull. Hence it being called a transferred epithet, because the epithet, the descriptor, has been transferred to something else. So we have a crowd of silent, dull men smoking cigarettes. There's something particularly hopeless about that image. And so straight away in the first couple of lines of the poem, we have Spender creating an atmosphere of despair and despondency. The silence, the passive smoking of cigarettes, the dullness of the people who are described as idling in the road, all of this presents us with a lifeless bunch of people. And they're lifeless because they have no work to occupy themselves, and they are without hope or prospects in the future. Now, we've got to be careful when we approach this idea, because there is a degree of complexity to it. On the one hand, your work, what you fill your time with, is something that provides most people with a tremendous amount of meaning and purpose to their lives. It's not the only thing, but it is a major thing. Without work, without anything to do, it can be very difficult to keep yourself going, because you're just trying to fill a bottomless pit. Okay, it isn't bottomless because we all die at some point. But you're trying to fill up your time with something. But if you're just filling your time with something for the sake of trying to fill your time, you're not really doing anything. So work provides a great deal of meaning and purpose. That's why often when you meet somebody new, you'll talk, and one of the things people want to know is, what is it that you do? And you want to know what they do, and you exchange information in that way. Because what we do doesn't define us, but it does tell us something about the other person. And presumably, if you're spending a considerable amount of time doing something, well, that thing must be somewhat important to you. Of course, the other thing that having work does is it provides you with the means to live, the means to, well, fund whatever it is that you really enjoy doing if your work isn't something you're extraordinarily passionate about, but it also supports your family. And so work is very important to us. It has a practical component in that work allows us to live, and it also has a deeper, more fundamental component that provides meaning and purpose to a person. I mean, you always want to ask somebody, maybe you don't want to do this, but what you can do is you can ask somebody, what do you do? Well, I'm an engineer. Why did you become an engineer? What is it that attracted you to that in the first place? Do you enjoy it? Like, why did you become an engineer? Well, I like numbers, I like math, whatever. And, it seems to be something that opens up a variety of opportunities. Well, why do you want those things? And you can scratch beneath the surface if you want to and find out what it is that drives the person forward simply by asking them what it is that they do. So what we do is quite core to us. Another way of illustrating this is to consider that for a lot of people, when they stop working because they retire, if they're not careful, they can suddenly go downhill in terms of health quite quickly and sort of lose themselves, because the thing that they fill their time with that has been important to them, that has gone a long way into defining who they are, even if, as I said earlier, what you do doesn't completely define who you are, when you suddenly lose that, it can be difficult to maintain your sense of self and keep on going. So that's work on the one hand. Now, I said we have to be careful because on the other hand, as is often mentioned on social media and anecdotally, your work isn't everything in your life either. Like that, it just isn't. Your job is not going to be there for you when something terrible happens to you. Your job is not going to be there for you when you retire. Your job is not going to be there for you when you're ill or depressed or miserable. As much as human resources departments and as much as corporations say that you're part of a team and a family and that everybody's there for each other, the reality is that the business, the company, the firm has to keep on churning. It's got to keep on existing. And the individual gets forgotten very, very quickly. And so we have to remember that there's that as well. And if you want a great short story that illustrates this, it's the death of Ivan Ilyich, I think. Ivan Ilyich, I can't remember quite. In any case, in that short story, Tolstoy demonstrates that simply chasing status or chasing society's expectations or trying to chase a good reputation with others through your work and so on doesn't provide you with total meaning. There has to be something else. You've got to have a why to whatever it is that you're doing. Without some deeper, more fundamental principle or drive or ambition, your work is ultimately not going to fill your life up. And that's what a lot of people realize too late, that work isn't everything. So we do have to be careful. Like, key to understanding this poem is the idea that work is something that provides a great deal of meaning to people and that it provides fulfillment. There really is nothing like the satisfaction of a job well done, believe it or not. But by the same token, work isn't everything. And if you put too much into your work, you end up a little bit messed up. But not having any work is also very, very damaging, perhaps more damaging than working too much. And this is the thing that Spender has a look at. So we have this very eerie, lifeless atmosphere and lifeless situation in the first stanza because there is a crowd of people, silent, dull, smoking cigarettes, idling in the road. And this is brilliantly summed up by the final line of the first stanza, in which the speaker says, very personal, I have the sense of falling light. Falling light, in this case, I would take to be a metaphor that goes a long way to illustrate the day coming to an end. And of course, the night is often associated with death. With the light falling, you're approaching the night. You're approaching death. So there is a kind of death that is approaching these people. And light is also obviously associated with hope. So a falling light is equally associated or is equally metaphorical for the idea that hope is falling out of the sky for these people. There just is no hope for them, or what little hope they had of finding work or making something of themselves or their lives is fast disappearing. And as a result, you have this listless, silent crowd. There just isn't any hope for them. And that is something that does happen if you are without work for a long period of time and you just cannot find anything and there are no opportunities. The temptation is to give up. Because what's the point? And that is something that is deeply, deeply distressing to people. Without hope, you really don't have any reason for living. We literally do exist on hope. We can keep on living because we hope that tomorrow will be another day and that there's potentially something better in the future. Very few people can exist without that promise. Let's look at the second part of his picture of this crowd. They, note the separation between the I in the first stanza and the they in the second. I have the sense, then it's they lounge at corners of the street. The use of the word lounge is interesting there, by the way, because to lounge usually means to laze about or to relax. In this case, the use of the word lounge is somewhat incongruous. These people are lounging at the corners of the street. They're not relaxing, and there might be the appearance of laziness, but they're not lazing about by choice. They're forced into this. But there's a subtle hint here at what we see in the next stanza. There's a subtle hint at how society often views people without work, that they are lazy, that somehow it is their fault. And listen, sometimes it is the person's fault, but that doesn't mean that it's their fault always. And certainly when there's some sort of economic disaster like the Great Depression or the state of South Africa and its economy, very often there are forces beyond the individual's ability to control that make it so that they cannot find work, try as they might. There are just no options open to them. And so what do you end up doing? Well, you sit around all day. And if you are particularly heartless, you can look at these people and say it's their fault. What is wrong with them? They should get out and go and get a job. But if you've searched and searched and searched and you can't find anything and you've lost all hope and you keep searching and you keep getting turned down, what else is there for you to do? So they lounge at corners of the street hoping, I guess, that something shows up out of the blue for them. That's why they're on the street, by the way, not shut up at home. They have friends in these crowds. They greet them with a shrug of shoulder. That is a universal sign of indifference. They turn their empty pockets out. The cynical gestures of the poor. Again, this is a universal sign of poverty, of not having anything. And so these people arrive, they look at each other, they shrug their shoulders, they pull out their pockets. They've got nothing. You might get some hope from somebody else suddenly having something or having a job and being enthusiastic, but they're all mired in a collective pit of misery and hopelessness. In this context, I think the word cynical, it's not that they are mocking anybody else or disregarding accepted standards or being concerned only with their own interests. I think they're cynical in the sense that they are doubtful that anything worthwhile is going to happen. And as a result, we have this gesture described as being cynical. And I think what this does is it just is supposed to heighten the emotional tension and the sense of pity that the reader feels for the people in this silent crowd. We're supposed to respond to them. The mood of the poem, as it were, is one of pity and perhaps even discomfort. We pity these people, but if you have anything, you are uncomfortable because there's a disparity between yourself and the other person. Your mileage will vary based on what type of person you are. One last thing about the first two stanzas. Note how we don't have a specific person spoken to here. It's very much a faceless crowd. We focus on the body parts, the shoulder, the cigarettes, the pockets, and so on, because it indicates the universal aspect to this, but also because it seems to deperson the jobless, the silent crowd in this poem. What we have here is a focus on the body parts because that kind of diminishes the individual to the parts that he possesses rather than considering the person as a whole. And I think that is supposed to emphasize what happens to a person when they are in this situation. In other words, it heightens or emphasizes the sense of their position in society and what has happened to them. The third stanza shifts perspective somewhat. We're still describing them, but we now have a contrast that's drawn, a very distinct contrast that's drawn between the jobless, the poor, and those who have work and who are comparatively rich. This is seen in line 9 and 10 particularly. Now they, the jobless, now they've no work, like better men. They are explicitly compared here with other men who have work, and these men are somehow better than the jobless. These better men are described as sitting at desks and taking much pay. There's our dichotomy. People with much pay and people with very little. But the interesting part, or this whole stanza, hinges on the use of the word better, that adjective better, to describe the men who have jobs. Because that is very much how the poor are often treated, as though they are inferior to those with jobs, or somehow the people with jobs are just better than the rest. Now, it may well be that somebody who is working is more productive. In fact, it just is that way. Somebody who is working at a job, a meaningful job, that person contributes more to the economy and to society than the person who is not doing any work. Now, it's a bitter pill to swallow if you are described as less than or inferior to somebody else, simply because, despite your best efforts, you cannot find a job. And let's be clear here. Somebody is not morally better because they've had the good fortune of finding work. Again, they might be contributing more to society, but that doesn't mean that the person is more valuable in a basic sense. And this is especially true when a person is desperately trying to find work, has lost all hope, is still trying to find work, but cannot. And I would say in our world, this is especially true in a context in which we have many jobs that really don't achieve all that much. I cannot remember for the life of me who came up with the term or coined the term, but there's the concept of bullshit jobs.
The anthropologist David Graeber from the London School of Economics came up with the term to refer to jobs that are meaningless and do not achieve anything.
But they don't generate anything productive. And there are certain forms of white-collar jobs where people sit at a desk, achieve nothing, and do nothing constructive, really, and walk away with a fat salary at the end of the month. Now, that's a whole other discussion for another day, but I do think it's worth pointing out that we are all aware that there are people who attend a workplace, collect their paycheck, well, they have it deposited into their bank at the end of every month, but actually that person kind of doesn't do anything productive for the company. They don't really add any value. They might not even do anything worthwhile. And that doesn't seem to make them better than somebody who doesn't have a job despite the fact that they desperately want one. Again, we're not talking about people, and these people do exist, who couldn't be bothered and like to eke out a living on the fringe of society, having the government or charitable organizations looking after them. There are some people who exist like this, but I don't think that's the majority. I think the majority of people who don't have work really would like to have work. And then they find themselves in a terrible position where they cannot get what they need. In any case, now they've no work like better men who sit at desks and take much pay. This is the dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots.
Oh no! Anyway.
Okay, I got interrupted there, so I have no idea what I just said. We'll see how this goes. Let's pick it up in the third stanza. The last two lines of the stanza, I think, fairly obviously refer to the jobless people. Here's this dichotomy again. Unlike the people who sit at desks and take much pay, in contrast to the people with nothing, in contrast to the people who have work, they sleep long nights. They only get up at 10 and then they watch the hours that drain away. And that idea that the hours drain away is quite an effective metaphor that compares the passage of time and how they drain away into nothing. So unlike somebody who is working and comes out with at least some pay at the end of it, these people have nothing to show for their time. And that's also something that's quite demoralizing, I think. So that's a metaphor of the time circling a drain, emptying to nothing, is kind of an indication, kind of a metaphor for what's happening to their lives. Their lives with the passage of time. I mean, remember, time is the one resource no one gets back. You can't ever actually make more time. Each day is another day closer to your death. And your time running out and all of that. So the hours draining away into nothing is quite an effective metaphor to, on the one hand, express how each day is sort of empty and meaningless and drains away into nothing, but also how their lives are being wasted without having anything to do, without having productive work that they can get into to provide for themselves, to find some fulfillment, to do something. Their lives are draining away into nothing as well. They're being wasted. And so this is very much the plight of the poverty-stricken, the plight of the jobless. And I think Spender quite effectively and quite sensitively here displays this plight that they find themselves in, and how demoralizing, as I've mentioned in an earlier stanza, this is. But stanza 4 then starts with quite the remarkable switch, because the speaker starts off by saying, I'm jealous of the weeping hours. Okay, we have personification there, the hours they look through, which is in turn a metaphor. So you've got a metaphor and personification working at the same time here. But he's jealous of the morning hours, the morning with an O, M-O-U, the morning hours that they stare through with hungry eyes. That's really odd. How can he be jealous of these people? What does that mean? Why is he jealous of them? Now, there are a variety of interpretations to this. Here's mine. I think you want to connect him being jealous with the hungry eyes that they have. And perhaps what he's getting at here is that he sees that in this hopeless, empty existence that they're leading, they, more than somebody who has it all, understand the value to time, money, life, work, and so on. Because they've had everything stripped from them, because they don't have anything, they've got a hunger for life. that you just can't understand if you're quite comfortable. Look, I think we all want to be comfortable in our lives, but comfort is also something that can kill you. It can kill your ambition and drive. Being overly concerned with comfort can make you tolerate things that just aren't okay or are mediocre because you're tolerably, comfortably miserable. Chris Williamson has this great idea that if you're in like a 6 out of 10 job or a 6 out of 10 situation, it's not bad enough for you to do something about it. So you kind of just go along. It's like dating somebody who's kind of okay. The person makes up, occupies a space. You're okay with that person is okay with you, and you kind of just go through with it. You lack the spectacular red flag that's going to make you bring it to an end, but it's also not particularly good. It's like 5.5 out of 10, and it's like, yeah, it's okay. It's better than nothing, I guess. So let's just carry on with it. Or being in a job that you don't hate, doesn't exactly fill you with joy or excitement. You're just kind of there. It's just mediocre. Chris Williamson's idea is that sometimes you need things to get really bad so that you will change the situation and the opportunity opens to a better one. So maybe things are okay at work. You're kind of comfortable. You're not particularly happy. And then something goes disastrously wrong. Maybe there's a new maybe a new coworker moves in, and you just cannot tolerate this person. He or she is the epitome of toxicity, and it just means that your 5.5/6 out of 10 job suddenly becomes 2, and every day is a living hell because this new person is not only intolerable, but they're also your new boss, and you just can't stand life anymore. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to get your resume ready, and you're going to move on out there as soon as you can. So perhaps he's jealous because he recognizes that in their hungry eyes, and even through their mourning and their misery, and the hours weep because the time is so miserable, in that situation, they're somehow experiencing life in a far more raw and real, intense way than somebody who's just comfortably muddling through life, sitting behind a desk. That doesn't mean it's pleasant though, because then he repeats with the anaphora in lines 15 and 16, that he is haunted. I'm haunted by these images, by their emptiness. I don't think the speaker would trade places with them. He's maybe jealous of the value they can put on life and having things, and maybe he's jealous of the way the intensity with which they can experience life, even if it is miserable. But it haunts him because he recognizes that it's a terrible situation to be in. And that's something that we can expand on. What happens to the society in which you have people without work and who are poverty-stricken is that, we create an us versus them situation where we are the productive members of society with jobs, who do something, who have money. We are better than them, the dregs of society who don't do anything and who just exist, taking up space, wasting oxygen, draining the resources of the state, and so on and so forth. And we create this us versus them dichotomy in which we put the other people down. And sometimes that might be justified because you do have people who are parasites on society. But there are also people who, given the opportunity, would absolutely flourish and be a great positive to society. And if those people are without work and without hope, that's not only bad for them, it's bad for society. And it's really, really poor to create this us versus them narrative and see those people as being less than somehow, inferior to you on a value level. So that's the first thing. But the other thing that it does is that it creates the sense of insecurity in the person who has something, because you don't want to end up there. It haunts you, not only because there's the fear that that could be you. When the economy is bad, that's certainly something that can happen. But it's also can haunt you because unless you are spectacularly self-centered and don't have a shred of compassion in your body, looking at somebody whose eyes are empty, who is without hope, who's part of the silent crowd, that has to do something to you. That should fill you with pity. If it doesn't, well, I don't know what to tell you. There should be some response to those people, some shred of pity, some empathetic response. So it can create these fault lines in society, and it can also create this fear in society as well. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree there, but I do think the use of that word haunting there is indicative of something being done to the broader society. There is a haunting of the spectre of joblessness and poverty that does, I don't want to say devalue, but that does have a negative effect on the broader society. And of course, on the individual level, that's the other thing that this poem explores. What this does to the individual is it saps them of their hope, it saps them of the fullness of life, and it leaves them empty husks, part of a silent, faceless mass, smoking their cigarettes, being dull, lacking colour, having the light going down, being in this empty, empty life that drains away into nothing. The little that they have left slowly drains out of them until there's nothing left, and their lives are characterized by hunger. It's a terrible situation to be in, and it's one that I think Stephen Spender illustrates brilliantly. Anyway, that's this poem in a nutshell. You could probably go into a lot more detail. You could probably pull it apart and have a look at all sorts of other poetic devices if you wanted. But I think what we really have to wrestle with, or what this poem does so well, is to get us to contemplate the plight of those who are less fortunate than us. And perhaps it's also a warning that if you're not doing anything to make sure that you are marketable as a person in the labour market, you best get on your bike and do something about it. Because you don't want to be sitting, staring through weeping hours with hungry eyes, alienated, isolated, and alone. Food for thought, perhaps.